The night started like any other Friday. Music blasting, friends laughing, and the smell of barbecue drifting through the backyard. But little did I know this party would change everything. Within hours, my entire life in this quiet suburban neighborhood would spiral into chaos. Chaos fueled by one person, Karen. Yes, that Karen. The one who thinks the HOA rules exist solely to enforce her personal version of perfection. And I had just become her next target. It all began around 8 p.m., when the first neighbors arrived carrying chips, drinks, and that inevitable sense of small-town curiosity. I had checked every rule in the HOA handbook. Parking, noise, even the number of guests allowed. Everything was legal. Everything should have been fine. But Karen had a different plan. You see, Karen doesn't see rules. She enforces her own authority. And she had her eyes on me from the moment she noticed the lights on in my backyard. By 9 p.m., the party was in full swing. The laughter was loud, the music was upbeat, and I was feeling the joy of hosting friends I hadn't seen in months. That's when my phone buzzed. I glanced down. "Your HOA president is at your gate." My stomach sank. A knock at the door, followed by the most insufferable tone you can imagine. "Excuse me, this party is a violation of HOA rules. You need to stop immediately, or I will take further action." I smiled politely. "Actually, Karen, we've double-checked the rules, and everything is within compliance." Her eyes narrowed, and that's when I realized nothing I said would calm her. Because Karen doesn't argue logically. She operates from a place of control and ego. But here's where things get interesting. What she didn't know is that I had anticipated her moves. Weeks earlier, I had hired a lawyer for unrelated legal advice, and they had recommended that I record interactions with overzealous HOA officials. Which means, at this exact moment, Karen had no idea her words, threats, and temper tantrums were being captured in real time. As she stomped around, pointing at imaginary violations, demanding I cease this event immediately, I stood calmly, letting her dig her own trap. Meanwhile, my lawyer's phone, tucked discreetly behind the potted plants, was silently recording every word, every threat, every ridiculous overstep of authority. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just a party anymore. This was war. A war that Karen had unwittingly recorded for evidence against herself. By the time the clock struck 10, the tension had escalated. Some neighbors were whispering behind their hands, casting uneasy glances at Karen. Others were texting me warnings. "She's serious. You need to stop this now." But I knew the tide was turning. Karen's rage was fueling her downfall, and all of it was being captured. Every hissed command, every dramatic finger point. I couldn't help but smirk. And that, my friends, was just the beginning. What Karen didn't know that night would later explode in a courtroom in a way she could never imagine. But before we get to that, you need to hear exactly how the confrontation escalated, and how my lawyer's secret recordings became the key to exposing her. After her initial tantrum at the gate, Karen didn't leave. Not even close. Instead, she went full HOA tyrant mode. I watched from the patio as she pulled out a clipboard, scribbling notes furiously like she was about to submit a formal complaint or maybe an indictment. Every finger point, every exaggerated gasp, every accusatory glare was now being silently captured by the hidden recording device my lawyer had set up, and believe me, she had no idea. By 10:30, the party was still in full swing, but now the atmosphere had shifted. Laughter had faded slightly, replaced by nervous glances toward the gate. A few brave neighbors stepped outside to confront Karen politely, but she wasn't having it. She waved them off like they were nothing. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," she barked, her voice dripping with self-importance. And that's when she started making threats that would later come back to haunt her. "You need to end this party right now, or I'll have you evicted," she declared, her tone theatrical enough to make anyone flinch. Some guests exchanged worried looks. Evicted? For a legal, well-planned party? It sounded insane, but to Karen, insanity was her method. At that moment, I felt a mix of fear and anticipation. Fear because I knew Karen could try to pull every trick in her HOA handbook. Anticipation because my lawyer's recording was picking up every word, every absurd claim, every attempt to manipulate the rules. And I began to see a pattern. Karen wasn't just angry, she was desperate. Desperate to assert control, desperate to prove she could dominate anyone who dared enjoy their own property. The confrontation escalated further when Karen started pacing, reading from her self-made rulebook, and even measuring distances in my yard with a tape, measure she somehow carried in her purse. I mean, who does that? It was absurd, almost comedic. But thanks to my lawyer's foresight, it was being documented as evidence. By 11 p.m., she had started knocking on my doors and windows, insisting that I turn the music down and reduce the number of attendees. I calmly explained that everything was legal, everything was permitted, But Karen wasn't here for reason. She was here for control. And every time she raised her voice, stomped her foot, or declared an imaginary violation, the recording captured it all. Little did she know her threats of eviction, her intimidation tactics, and her over-the-top behavior were not just being recorded. They were creating a trap that would dismantle her authority completely. The irony was delicious. Karen thought she was intimidating me, but in reality, she was giving me all the ammunition I needed. By midnight, she finally left, but not before delivering one last dramatic declaration. "I'll be back tomorrow with the paperwork." "You'll regret this!" Little did she know, the paperwork would be useless. The evidence against her was already secure, thanks to the secret recording. Next, things get even more intense. Karen's retaliation takes an unexpected and legally explosive turn. The showdown in the following days would be something no one in the neighborhood would ever forget. The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. Texts and whispers about the previous night's party spread like wildfire. "Did you see Karen?" one neighbor asked. "She looked furious," another replied. "I've never seen her this worked up." Meanwhile, I stayed calm, sipping coffee and reviewing the recordings my lawyer had secured. Every angry outburst, every nonsensical demand, every dramatic finger point, everything was there, crystal clear and completely in Karen's own voice. By late morning, Karen returned. This time, she didn't bother with polite knocks or small threats. No, she came prepared with what she thought would be the ultimate weapon. Eviction paperwork. She thrust it in my face, expecting me to cower. "Sign this or you're out," she snapped. The audacity. I smiled politely, hiding my smug satisfaction, and said, "Karen, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I've already consulted my lawyer." That's when her eyes widened. Slightly, though she quickly masked it with another hissed tirade. She didn't know that the lawyer had not only prepared the legal grounds to counter her claims, but had also analyzed the recordings. Every threat she'd made the night before was admissible evidence of intimidation, harassment, and misuse of HOA authority. Karen's attempt to scare me into submission was about to backfire spectacularly. Frustrated, she began pacing, muttering under her breath, clearly calculating her next move. She even tried to recruit neighbors to testify that the party had disturbed the peace, but I had already spoken with the majority of them, and many were more than willing to confirm that the event had been perfectly lawful. Karen's influence in the neighborhood wasn't what she thought it was. Over the next few days, things escalated in subtle, terrifying ways. I started receiving anonymous complaints, late-night calls, even notes slid under my door, all orchestrated to intimidate me. But my lawyer had anticipated this. We documented everything. Every interaction, every message, every note, and all of it tied back to the same pattern. Karen attempting to leverage authority to bully me out of my home. Then came the day that changed everything. My lawyer scheduled a meeting with me and Karen, well, technically, Karen's representatives from the HOA. The goal? To confront her with the recordings and the evidence of her overreach. As I watched her stride into the room, full of her usual self-importance, I felt no fear. This was the moment where the tables would turn. What happened in that meeting was nothing short of explosive. Karen, the self-proclaimed ruler of the neighborhood, found herself cornered, unable to argue or manipulate her way out. Every lie, every exaggeration, every imaginary rule she had invoked was laid bare. And the best part? She had done it all on record, unknowingly signing her own defeat. The day of the showdown finally arrived. I walked into the HOA meeting room with a quiet confidence. Karen, of course, arrived like she owned the place, striding in with her clipboard and that signature scowl. She looked around, probably expecting nods of approval or fear from the room. What she didn't realize was that the tables had completely turned. The hidden recordings, every single moment of her over-the-top threats, were ready to speak louder than any angry speech she could give. The meeting began formally, but tension filled the air instantly. Karen launched into her usual performance, claiming that my party had violated rules she had personally interpreted in her favor. She waved her hands, pointing to the imaginary infractions she had noted, expecting everyone to be impressed or intimidated. But my lawyer cut in, calm and assertive. "Actually, we have a recording of your interactions regarding this matter, showing that all actions taken by our client were fully legal, and that your threats constitute harassment under HOA regulations." Karen froze. For the first time, I saw a crack in her armor. Her mouth opened and closed like a goldfish, words failing her. My lawyer played snippets of the recording, Karen's shrill demands, exaggerated claims, and threats of eviction. The room went silent. Neighbors who had once whispered nervously were now wide-eyed, watching her credibility unravel before their eyes. Every threat, every temper tantrum, Every attempt to bully me had been captured, and it was all admissible evidence. Karen's face turned red, then pale. Her ego, which had fueled so many unnecessary confrontations, was crumbling. The board members, who had often let her get away with overstepping boundaries, were now forced to listen objectively. One by one, they asked questions, clarified procedures, and eventually acknowledged that Karen had acted beyond her authority. I sat back, feeling a mixture of relief and vindication. The nightmare had finally flipped into justice. By the end of the meeting, the HOA had no choice but to retract their threats. Karen was reprimanded officially, and the recorded evidence ensured that any future attempts to target me would be swiftly shut down. The party, which had started as a simple weekend gathering, had unexpectedly exposed the truth about a person abusing power. My lawyer reminded me that documenting interactions like these isn't just precaution, it's protection. And in this case, it saved me from being bullied out of my own home. As I left the meeting room, I glanced at Karen one last time. Her glare was sharp but defeated. She had underestimated me, underestimated the power of preparation, and most importantly, underestimated the evidence that could expose her completely. That night I celebrated not just the victory, but the lesson that standing your ground, staying calm, and having the right strategy can turn a nightmare into a story of triumph. And that's how one wild party, a determined HOA president, and a secretly recording lawyer turned into the ultimate tale of justice and empowerment. If you enjoyed watching this crazy HOA showdown, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more wild neighborhood drama, and drop a comment below telling me what you would have done in this situation. Your support really helps the channel grow. And trust me, you don't want to miss the next story.